like to invite Neeraja Sheth ji to give her presentation on dialogues and insights on Dhyana in Mahābhārata and Dhyāna-Yoga of the Gītā. Suprabhatam, welcome Neeraja Sheth ji.
Thank you. Firstly, Hari Om, Pranam, Namaste. I would like to thank Indica, the organizers of this conference, for the opportunity to present here. I'm well aware that I walk in the company of giants. This is a modest attempt to understand the guidance for Dhyana given millenniums of years ago as relevant to all humanity in the modern world to lead a productive life that leads to happiness and spiritual fulfillment. What is meditation? Meditation is a generic term in English, and I refer to the dictionary. It basically tells me, Merriam-Webster tells me, that it means spending time in quiet thought for religious purposes or relaxation. It reminds me of an episode in the TV show Seinfeld, where a character says he's listening to a meditation tape, and every time that his blood pressure is rising, the tape tells him he should say serenity now. So as he's scrunched up in the back of a small car, he is going through New York with no leg room, his wife seated in front of him, not pulling her seat forward. He starts saying and eventually yelling, serenity now. Now he's following his meditation tape. But if we look at the wife's face in front, it is closer to what we understand as meditation in the Hindu tradition, as being in Dhyana. She's completely untouched by the needless drama that's unfolding around her. Seated firmly, her head held high, looking ahead, her mind is on higher things. So Dhyana, as already covered by many learned speakers yesterday, is explained in the Upanishads, in texts of Vedic literature, and finds reference in many Purana, in the Itihasa, Ramayana and the Mahābhārata, and also explained in detail in the Bhagavad Gītā. So for this presentation, we look at the explanation in the Bhagavad Gītā, chapter 6, Dhyāna-Yoga, and share insights from some conversations in the Mahābhārata. So in this presentation, every time that we hear the word meditation, we are referring to Dhyana as described in the Gītā. Dhyana is described as profound contemplation and deep reflection, so that the triad of the Dhyata, the meditator, Dhyeya, the object of meditation, and Dhyana itself, the meditation, all merge into the object of meditation. The meditator rises above individuality and otherness, and he looks inward. The object of meditation being the self, the focused meditator will merge into the self. So what is the goal of Dhyana? Merging into the self, yes. Let's understand the goal of Dhyana by understanding the context of the Bhagavad Gītā. The prince Arjuna, ready to fight for his elder brother Yudhishthira's right to the throne, looks around, and facing him are family and friends. Everybody is ready to fight, and this is not a WhatsApp group. It's a fight unto death. So horrified and dejected, he sits down, confused, not knowing what to do, and he wonders whether he should give up or whether he should fight and kill his own people. Luckily, his charioteer is his cousin, lifelong friend, philosopher and guide, Sri Krishna, who advises him. And the finale to this conversation around Dhyana-Yoga, in there, Sri Krishna says, Tasmad yogi bhavarjuna, meaning Arjuna, be a yogi. It is the most exalted state. And he says that the silent and quiet meditator is superior to a person who is selflessly serving the world or performing worship with dedication, or a scholar who has studied the Shastra and understood it. These are not mutually exclusive approaches. A scholar who worships with dedication and serves selflessly can evolve now through meditation, and ultimately abiding in the self attains liberation. So liberation from what? From the ignorance of individuality and otherness, from all the identifications that we have in the transient world. The yogi will rise above that mundane world and beyond the names and forms that exist around, will instead meditate and identify with the existence itself. So Krishna says, he who has Shraddha, and the closest translation in English is he who has faith, not an exact translation, but close enough, that he who has faith, he who contemplates on me, Madgatena antaratmana, meaning mind absorbed in me, is the most exalted among the yogis. So here the me is referring not to the human-looking persona of Sri Krishna that we always see, but to the consciousness, the eternal self, which is of the nature of Satchitananda. So now that we know the goal, the question is, how do we get there? How is one qualified for dhyana? I may think I'd like to go to Mars. So many people are trying. Why not me? But am I qualified? The preparatory steps to be in dhyana have already been outlined earlier. And Krishna outlines them again over here. Karma yoga, the path of action. So nishkama karma, meaning action without personal gratification. The meditator or the yogi, having risen above desire, by rising above raga and dvesha, which is likes and dislikes, having mastered the senses and the mind, so that he can remain equipoised in pleasant and unpleasant conditions. And with practice, not just direct experience, but even the memories brought up by the mind will not agitate the mind anymore. The other point to consider is action without doership and enjoyership. That is freedom from egocentric agency, that I'm doing something, and freedom from egocentric desire. There's no ownership of the results of the actions. And finally, renunciation of thought. When the mind is completely withdrawn from the sensory world and its experiences, the person is free from sankalpa, the very desire to do something. This does not mean inaction or laziness. It means that the only action to be performed is duty, responsibility, service as per the role and the need of the moment. But there is no other personal desire to perform action. A point that is emphasized here is persistent self-effort to qualify for dhyana. So lift oneself and do not let oneself fall. It's a very simple message with a very powerful meaning. We need to introspect closely, and we have to lift ourselves to be a better version and to try to be the best version of ourselves. There is no external agency lifting us. We can only evolve through continuous self-effort. So having purified the body and mind through karma yoga and working constantly to improve, the person with an equipoised mind and a steady intellect is now qualified to receive knowledge. And here's the path of knowledge, Dhyāna-Yoga. On the path of knowledge, one has to be, according to Sri Krishna, Jnana Vijnana Truptatma. Such a person, content in himself, has acquired jnana, the knowledge, by study, and through the Shravana Manana Nididhyasana process that some speakers already alluded to yesterday, he has developed insights through contemplation, and he reflects upon them constantly. And the other word that is used here that's important is kutastha, meaning the anvil on which metal is hammered, but the anvil stays steady and unchanging. That is the nature of the person who is now considered qualified to meditate. So now that I know the goal and I am qualified, how do I actually prepare for meditation? So there's a very clear set of instructions given in Dhyāna-Yoga in chapter 6. The meditator needs to be solitary, to avoid disturbance and interference, be established on a firm seat. You don't want to be wobbly somewhere, not too high with the risk of falling down, not too low where I'm scared that some flowing water may collect where I sit, at a clean spot, not to be bothered by odors and insects and not to fall sick later. So on the moist earth, I should have some dry grass, over that a deer skin to maintain the warmth, and then a soft cloth on which I can sit. All this is to avoid disturbance from physical discomfort. It is not seeking comfort, it is just avoidance of discomfort, which will disturb the meditation. And then with a single pointed mind that I have already developed through the discipline of Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga, without any agitations in the mind, I can go ahead and meditate. Now, people love surprise birthday parties, now to get that emotional high, but a high by definition has to be followed by a low. And so the meditator is one who has long understood this, and he wants to avoid all these mental agitations, and he has learned to keep his mind composed at all times. He needs to sit firmly with the head, neck, and body in a straight line, as if looking at the tip of the nose, withdrawing the mind from all else and concentrating on the self alone. Now, this is a very clear one-time set of instructions. And I would fall many times from my bicycle before I learned how to balance. So once I managed to stay on the bicycle for a few minutes and I can get off the bicycle without falling, then I need to practice. So it becomes so good. I become so good at it that it appears to be effortless. So for being in dhyana, we are advised to practice consistently and persistently and have disciplined habits. Now, how does one practice to be in dhyana? How do I persist in meditation? How do I master the mind and the senses? I have a daughter, and I've seen 4-year-old girls beginning to learn ballet. And after a few years, they learn how to stand on their toes. There are sprains and broken toes, bleeding and bandages and tears and tantrums. But when we see the professional ballerinas performing in a concert, we see them just gliding across the stage effortlessly. This comes from training and discipline, mastery over the body, mind, senses. So the meditator needs to eat, sleep, exercise in moderation. Don't starve yourself, don't overindulge, so the mind does not keep getting distracted by that sense object. No effort is needed. That's the most important thing in dhyana, that no effort is needed except freeing ourselves from the impediments to dhyana. And to minimize these external distractions, there is abhyasa and vairagya. Abhyasa trains the mind to overcome pain and unpleasantness, while vairagya is practice to detach the mind from pleasantness of the sense objects and memories that it is attracted to. So one of the approaches to master the mind could be japa, the repetition of a word or a phrase or a mantra that keeps the mind from flitting from the object of meditation, which happens in the initial stages. The meditation is successful when there is no longer a longing for objects. In the absence of longing, the meditator will finally revel in yoga sukha, the happiness on the seat of meditation. The example of the mind of a yogi is given here in the Gītā as a steady flame of a lamp protected from the wind. And what is that wind? The wind is the ignorance of individuality and separateness, the tendency to get lost in the transient world. So through constant practice, this ignorance is removed as the yogi's attention is not on thoughts, but on the basis of all thought. And the meditator contemplates not at the level of individual objects, but at the level of existence itself, till the mind starts abiding in the self. The Uttama Sukha, says the Gītā, ultimate happiness or bliss is reached through dhyana. Again, Satchit Ananda is the nature of the self. So this is the insights from the Gītā. There's a couple of conversations in the Mahābhārata that they have a lot of content, but for the sake of a short presentation, I've just taken a couple of examples. One of them is from the Udyoga Parva, the book on the preparation of war before the war actually started. And there's a section called the Sanat Sujata Parva. So before the war, Dhritarashtra was concerned that the Pandavas would claim the throne and would eventually get it probably in battle. The answers to his concerns by the sage Sanat Sujata are aligned with the chapter on Dhyāna-Yoga in the Gītā. There's a lot of content here again, but I've just taken a couple of points. Dhritarashtra asks whether dharma always wins when unrighteousness rises. And the sage said that unrighteous people who perform desire-filled actions will commit themselves to future lifetimes of similar lives where they have the opportunity to purify themselves. So they need to abandon the desire-driven actions, renounce the fruit of action, renounce the doership and enjoyership, and to be free from the consequences thereby. At the same time, they need to go through, like we discussed earlier, Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, study the Vedas, contemplate, internalize the knowledge, and be qualified to meditate. There are those who meditate for earthly goals, like a child or a kingdom. There are those who meditate not for any earthly goal, but just to win divine grace. But the highest, says Sri Krishna, are the yogis who abide in the self. Those are in the most exalted state. It's not needed for the yogi to be in a forest or a mountaintop. A person engaged in the world with an equipoised mind can perform his duties silently in the world. The Mauna Dhyana. The other conversation is from the Shanti Parva. And again, there is a lot in the Shanti Parva. So I'm referring to the Bhishma Yudhishthira conversation, which is the part of the third section of Shanti Parva. Moksha Dharma Parva. After winning the war, Yudhishthira went to take guidance from his great uncle Bhishma, who was still lying on the battlefield on a bed of arrows, awaiting death. And the conversations of Bhishma and Yudhishthira are divided into 3 sections: Raja Dharma, how to administer a kingdom and rule the people; Apad Dharma, which is how to face adverse conditions as a king; and Moksha Dharma, how to attain liberation, which is self-effort for each individual. So in the Moksha Dharma Parva, Bhishma's advice is in line with what we have seen in Dhyāna-Yoga. He asks Yudhishthira to master the mind and the senses, to live a disciplined life, to remove the impediments to dhyana from his life, to contemplate on the knowledge of the Shastra, and to keep a mind that is composed and have a steady intellect. He cautions Yudhishthira that in the initial stages of being in dhyana, the mind is like a drop of water that's precariously balancing on a leaf, and it has to be controlled with discipline till it is constantly focused on the self and merges with it. Bhishma here narrates the conversation of Sanat Kumara with Vritrasura. Vritrasura lay dying. He was a person of knowledge, had been battling Indra, and now he was close to death. He had been defeated. He had lost his kingdom. And he wanted to ask, how does a person get liberation? And again, Sanat Kumara explains to him that through purification over lifetimes and through significant self-effort at mastering the mind and senses, contemplation on the knowledge received, and the internalization of these insights, he will realize the oneness of all and ultimately merge with the self. This did good for Vritrasura in this episode, where he then passes away and is liberated. In conclusion, what is dhyana again? Dhyana is the process or the way that a person has to be in order to attain liberation. For that, the preparatory steps are the path of action and the path of knowledge. Arjuna's dilemma is one that we all face, that when we are making a decision where we incur a high personal cost. Like, should I go ahead with this? Should I avoid this? Should I run away? Should I come back another day? There are so many choices to be considered. And at that point, the advice that comes from the Bhagavad Gītā applies to us even now. And the journey of Yudhishthira to the throne that is rightfully his is really like the journey of a meditator who faces challenges in keeping the mind focused inwards or gets constantly distracted by other things. The story of Yudhishthira, a king by birthright. At birth, we already knew he was going to be the king, and yet it took years and years and a lot of struggle before he got his throne. He was an exemplary scholar and an accomplished warrior, so qualified to take on the role, but yet he faced challenges, just like a meditator who's qualified, but still faces challenges, including self-doubt. Yudhishthira's ultimate victory and coronation is analogous to the yogi ultimately realizing the self. So the ultimate goal of dhyana is always liberation and abiding in the self. Thank you. Namaste, pranam, hari om.
Thank you very much for that very crisp presentation, Neeraja ji. It has raised the bar, set the standards for the presentations, for the upcoming presentations during the course of the day. And just I have just waiting for questions. So I just have one or two observations. One is your talk beautifully brought out the Sutra Bhashya connection, means between the Bhagavad Gītā and Mahābhārata. I have heard from a scholar, very respected scholar, that all the principles that are spoken of in the Bhagavad Gītā can be illustrated from stories, dialogues, conversations in the Mahābhārata. So you have done exactly the same of connecting the Sutra Bhashya kind of connection between Mahābhārata, the Bhagavad Gītā and Mahābhārata. And just one observation is that in the verse, Yathadipo Nivatasthaha Nengate Sopama Smrita Yogino Yatachittasya Yunjato Yogamatmanaha. So the yogin who attains a very serene state of mind. So the example of lamp. So that example of lamp, when we go by the verse, we see that the yogin, it's not the yogin's mind which becomes still like the flame of the lamp. The yogin in his entirety, yoginaha upama, not yoginaha chittasya. This one small observation which indicates that the deeper level of stillness at all levels of the yogin. This is just one observation. So
thank you so much.
Yeah. So there is also a comment from Meghji where on the talk, insights delivered in a style that attracts calm and calmness and attention. So notice your attention to aesthetics in trying to get the colors and background of the talk. Yeah. Thank you very much, Neeraja. Thank you very much.
Thank you.